Welcome to Beyond the Backlog. I'm Nick.
And I'm Zack.
And today we thought we'd go over a couple of remakes that we both really want.
I think this is each of our top 5 games that we want to see redone, remade, remastered, re-released, whatever you have.
Yep. Now mine was probably 2 main categories. Either it's a good game that's just kind of old that I want redone. Main things being like graphics, art style, maybe fix a couple of the issues. Number 2 is like a game or a series that I really liked or I really want to try that just is kind of funneled and hard to access.
And I would say I tried my best not to cheat on all of them and make all of them like trilogies or like multi-pack releases that could be done. But for the most part, I focused on games that I've loved as a child and think would make a lot of sense to see re-released now, but like done up for modern audiences. Yeah. So if you want to kick us off?
Yeah, my first one I've got is Parasite Eve. It was a 1998 RPG originally developed by Square.
Really?
For the PS1. And it was based off of a novel. And I think that is one of the main reasons why it's so hard to get nowadays. But basically, I wasn't a PlayStation kid growing up, didn't have access to it. And this is the kind of thing that I think remakes are for. Coming from like the Switch era where you're just re-releasing a bunch of games, I find that to be a good thing. Because it just gives a wider audience access to good games.
Mm-hmm. Now, is this a particularly like expensive or hard to find for PS1 game?
A little bit, yeah. And it's the first of a trilogy. So how they kind of do it was there was a book that came out, I think in 1995 called Parasite Eve. And this game is a sequel to it. You don't need to know anything about the book, but it kind of makes some homages if you did go through it. The author went on record saying there's a really good interpretation of the game. It's one of those backhanding the compliments where they're like, this was better than I expected or could have ever anticipated it being. But I think the main issue is the licensing rights expired. And since they got the rights before it had international release, it made it a little bit more difficult to get through with it. Last I saw, you could get it on the PS3 PlayStation Network store. I don't know if that's still the case.
But like, it's definitely not something that's on Steam or anything.
It's not on Steam. It's not on PlayStation 4 or 5. So the only legitimate way to play it is if you have it on the PS3 store or physical.
Okay.
And it's kind of like a horror-esque game. I want to say in the vibe of Resident Evil 1. I truly don't know too much about it, though. But I think that's just something that makes it most wanted to be remade.
Is the fact that you don't have a lot of experience with it? Like, have you ever actually played it before?
I've never played it before. I've seen people play it.
Yeah.
So it's one of those, I'm like, this just seems really cool. It's the same kind of thing that makes me excited about the new Silent Hill 2. Is someone who didn't experience that as a remake can be my main entryway into it. Mm-hmm. It was the same thing for Resident Evil. I didn't play any Resident Evils really growing up, so when they had the remakes of 2 and 3, that was kind of my first foray. So I would want something kind of like that, where they just build it from the ground up, do a bunch of cool things with it, and then go. Because right now it's just a huge hassle to try to get.
Yeah. And it sounds like something where audiences today would still connect with it.
Yeah, it's one of the cult classics. It makes all those types of lists that didn't do super well, but really has a following.
I see. And kind of interesting that my first game I wanted to talk about is one I also technically have never played, one I don't even own, and that is actually The Simpsons Hit and Run. So I don't own that particular game, but I wanted to include the Game Boy Advance game Road Rage, which is also a Crazy Taxi clone. So both of these are Crazy Taxi clones. Hit and Run came out originally. It was like a GameCube, PS2, Xbox, like on all of those. And something I didn't know until I was actually just writing this up was it's the 20th Simpsons game that was released.
Jeez.
Yeah, so between 1993 and 2003, they released 20 games. Holy crap.
Yeah, I'm like, I have 2.
Anyway, the art style being based on a cartoon lends itself pretty well to like being able to just remaster it. Because like it is this like cell shaded art style where it's like all you have to do is kind of plump up some of the lighting and textures and it's still going to look really good. I think this game lends itself also really well to the fact that there's been a lot more Simpsons episodes since 2003. So if they were to remake it and kind of go from the ground up, they could add in a lot of new characters. They could modify backgrounds to represent new locations that they didn't before. Like maybe do that instead of making like a full sequel. I think it would make more sense to just take the game that already exists and just add a few new features to. Beyond that, there's also kind of like a single player mission structure. And I think there's only like 10 missions to do in them and each one only takes a few minutes, but they're like cool little breaks from the main arcade, driving around, picking people up and dropping them off somewhere else for money.
Yeah.
So, to put it all together, because as I said, I played Road Rage, which even had that single player mission structure as well. But what I would want is let's take both of these games, combine them together, have all of these worlds accessible and all of these characters and all these vehicles accessible. But let's kind of find a physics engine halfway between, because I would say Road Rage, you feel like you're a feather floating on air when you go over humps. Like you literally get so much airtime. Whereas in Hit and Run, you're like a big metal thunk every time you land on the ground. So let's find somewhere that's like a nice middle arcadey ground between. And then just kind of update the animation quality to kind of reflect that improvement the Simpsons themselves have had in animation quality over the last 2 decades, and maybe add in some like online leaderboards, some weekly challenges to like push players to keep coming back. This week you have to play as groundskeeper Willie, who has the slowest vehicle, and you have to try and do this particular challenge run through this cool winding level. I don't know. That just sounds like something where I'm like, it wouldn't take that much effort. You can just use what's already in the game, but kind of turn it into a game that people keep coming back to. And I think that's my biggest idea, is turn it into a game that incentivizes you to keep coming back every week for just a little bit of arcade fun.
Now, would you keep it the same sort of style that Crazy Taxi has? Because to me, Crazy Taxi is one of those that's really fun to play, but you can only get maybe like a half hour, 45 minutes out of it every time you play.
Well, and that's exactly it, is have this sort of progression system where it's like you need to meet the requirements to unlock your next area, which is retained from the original game, but on top of just progressing and unlocking things. I mean, like, let's have just a little shop menu where it's like, oh, you earned points from doing weekly challenges, and you use those points to buy new costumes, some more vehicles, maybe even a new area or something.
Okay. Yeah, something to just kind of give that little bit of extra oomph to it, right?
Yeah, give it just some more unlockable, some more play time, I think, is what it needs.
Okay.
I think it would be a fun game. Anyway.
Yeah. My next one is one I would consider a very good game that I just want done better. And that's going to be Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion. 2006 action RPG. It's Bethesda. Most people know the game. It's the one that came before Skyrim that to me is better in every way.
I couldn't even tell you the subtitles of the ones prior to Oblivion, but I'd be damned if I didn't know that one.
Right? Oblivion's my personal favorite Elder Scrolls game. I would rather a company like Bluepoint remake it.
What have they done?
I think Bluepoint's the one that did Shadow of the Colossus and Demon Souls.
Oh, okay.
Those remakes.
I'm on to you.
Yeah. Rather than just give it back over to Bethesda, because I think they would just straight re-release the game like they've done with the 80 million Skyrim clones. But I think you need to do a from the ground remake of the animations, of the styling, bring it into a newer era, because like we're getting to almost 20 years since the game came out. And it looks kind of dated, but it's also one of those things to be like, Bethesda did make good games at one point, honestly.
One could argue they still make okay games.
Okay games, yeah, but like Oblivion to me was just, that's the pinnacle of when you had that Western stylized version of RPG, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your classic, I don't have to worry too much about the combat. I can just swing a sword, fire a thing.
Like, I have seen quite a few hours of Skyrim. Like, does it play largely the same, though?
Pretty well the same. But you had some issues in Skyrim that were there in Oblivion that didn't feel quite as bad, because the game scales up with you, which is kind of annoying. So there isn't like higher level areas. You're just all of a sudden going to find bandits that now wear the best armor in the game. Right, which I think is kind of like a cool little thing. But you're fighting like the Daedra, which are like these fire demon things. And as you rank up, there's different versions of them that show up.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So until like level 20, you're going to be facing the two easiest ones, and then you get a really harder one, and then it just kind of scales up beyond that, which was kind of cool. But I basically think you just give it to the people that make good games better.
Yeah.
And then you just have them make this game better.
Fair enough. All right, I'll move on to my number 4 here, and that is Zelda 2, The Adventures of Link.
That's an interesting one.
So this is the original NES game, and I thought about it, and I thought about it long and hard today, and there was 2 options I came up with. Option number 1, we go for a 2D overhead style remake that looks like the graphics of like A Link Between Worlds on 3DS. Mm-hmm. And with that, we add a bunch of overworld collectibles and like some new items that add convenience to the game. Like, give me bottles that I can have fairies in, so that way when I die to the Thunder Beast in the last like Death Palace, I don't want to throw my controller at a wall. Yeah. Give me options. Give me convenience. Give me new hints and clues as to where I'm supposed to go and what I'm supposed to do. But I think if you do it right, you can kind of rewrite all of the dialogue and turn these cities into like actual cities, and characters in them, make them feel like they aren't just walking, like press button to interact with NPCs. Maybe like some less punishment for deaths. Like, let's not have a life system anymore. Let's fix some of these enemy spawns and caves and stuff, so that way it doesn't feel like you're stuck there just trying to kill the same knight over and over because he backs you up. And then when you try to walk forward again, oh, he's respawned. And I just leaned very close to the mic when I did that. Hope you like that. Beyond that, I would say we're going to retain the magic system and the experience system, but like tweak it so that it's not as grind heavy. And again, that's all in this 2D overhead style. I think the other one that would look really cool, and I don't know how well it would work, is let's just take the theme and idea of Zelda 2 and let's make a full-on 3D game out of it.
It's kind of akin to, you had Miyamoto saying that they took inspiration from the first Legend of Zelda when they did Breath of the Wild, mm-hmm. right? Where it's like, that's our base imagining, and then let's kind of go from there.
Mm-hmm. And that's where I don't imagine Zelda 2 as like a Ocarina of Time style 3D. I imagine it more as like Breath of the Wild style 3D, where it's like, let's give you the options on like how to progress and make it to the next area, instead of just being either you're walking on like paved path or grass where you can encounter enemies. Just make that entire space between towns all this varied traversable terrain, and let me loose to explore and just get to my destination naturally. So I think as long as you just retain that original basis of like, here's the 8 palaces, here's the upgrade order of the items and like the general theming of the palaces and stuff, you could kind of just be as creative as you want and have fun, go wild, do something that just completely rewrites Zelda 2 into a really good, really enjoyable pick up and play Zelda game.
Yeah,
and not like a niche, hardcore only title that everyone always rails as being the worst in the series.
See, I have a friend who Zelda 2 is one of his favorite games of the series, but I think he just kind of likes that style, and he didn't really come from a Zelda background, so that's just kind of like, it's like an early RPG kind of game, and that's kind of cool. But the game itself is just kind of in need of something like that, because it's always going to show up on like hard to beat NES games, and I don't think it would show up on a list of NES games that you should try today kind of thing, right?
No, it's hard to play nowadays without rewind and like save state features.
100%. It's an arcade game, but not an arcade game, right? My next one, we're going to take you back to the GameCube era. We're going with Custom Robo. So it was a 2004 game developed by a company called Noise, which really just did the Custom Robo style of games. I found out researching that this is like game number 3 or 4 in the Custom Robo series.
Didn't they have one on like Super Nintendo that was like...
And then they had one on like a handheld system after this.
I forget what the one on Super Nintendo was, like Mech Warriors or something. I'm totally wrong on that, but...
Yeah,
anyway.
they were variations of Custom Robo. So this game, I think, technically is like Custom Robo Battle Revolution. That's, I think, what it was called. But this game is wild. So you basically make these little robos that fight each other. Whenever you faced someone, you would get either a new robo or parts or equipment to customize the robo, and then you just find what style works best. You battle them. You can do multiplayer on it, which was a lot of fun. But the campaign is crazy. Because it's like you're in this domed city, and your family's disappeared, but then you get a thing from your dad who has just died, apparently, that's like, hey, you should become a robo commander. So then you do.
All right.
And then you just like fight other people that do it. So it's like a Yu-Gi-Oh! Or like a Pokemon, but just with robo battling.
And they say that stories in video games aren't art.
Yeah. I was looking at some of the ratings. This one's the lowest rated one of the ones that I had on this list, but it's just fun.
I've only ever played it once, but anytime I've heard it mentioned online, or especially in the friend group that I played it with, it is always really highly regarded.
Oh, yeah. No, it was a lot of fun playing it with my family growing up. It's more in my Parasite Eve section of remakes, where it's like, I just want a wider audience for it, because it's, came out 20 years ago and was only released on the GameCube. So, like, you just... give us something with it.
Yeah. When you have a game that there would be people that would want to play it, like right now, that just physically don't have the time and money to go out and... Because it's not even a cheap game on GameCube. It's like $100+.
Yeah, it's no gotcha force, but it's one of the pricier ones.
Yeah, plus the price of a GameCube and controller and memory card itself. Like most people just aren't going to play it. So I agree. Like that is one that I would definitely check out. But my example of one that is kind of stuck on an old system, and I think if people really gave it the chance, they would love it. Ogre Battle 64, Person of Lordly Caliber. Now, every single one of Ogre Battle's little subtitles is based on a different song by Queen, actually. Just fun little fact. So this one in particular is Nintendo 64 RPG, which is not a common sight, considering there was like 2 others. But it turns out...
64.
And Aiden Chronicles. Turns out that this is actually a really good Nintendo 64 RPG, though. The other 2, not so much. So what I think makes this one stand out is that this is more of a strategy game, but there's a lot of strategy in how you assemble your units, because each one can have up to like 5 people in a little 3x3 grid. And some units might synergize really well with one another, and you can get attacked from any side out in the field. So if you have your archers in the back, they'll do more damage and strike twice, but they might be limited on who they can actually like focus on. Whereas if you get hit from behind, now your archers are at the front and will do less damage and only shoot once. So you have to be very careful how they get deployed out and like who's in control of each one, if each one has healing involved in it, or if you load them with items so they can heal in between. So other games in this series have been remade, such as Tactics Ogre Reborn, which is one that I did want to play this year. Might even be my game I play this month. And the overworld navigating in Ogre Battle 64 in particular, it can be a little clunky and it can feel like it's very menu intensive, like kind of stopping you from getting to the action because you have to go into the menus, pick out all of your units. Like you can move them around one by one, check all their stats, give them all the best armor and equipment and stuff that you have available to you. So in terms of if I was to re-release this and remaster it for the modern audience, obviously graphically Nintendo 64 games don't look very pretty. And I think when I look at the character models for it now, I'm like, they are very like balloony, cartoony. It's just like so zoomed out on this screen here that it just kind of blurs together. Like you can't even like make out facial features on some of the units. So I think if they were going to redo this, obviously graphical overhaul, and then let's streamline some of this information delivery to the player. So, for example, there's the system where your units essentially have an affinity, like good or evil, and it's a score from like 0 to 100. And if you come to a new encampment out in the field and your guy is a high affinity and the encampment is a low affinity, instead of liberating it, you'll capture it. And so if you go around capturing everything, you'll get a bad ending to the game. But nothing in the game explains this to you.
Okay.
So it's that kind of thing. And there's a lot of these hidden features that it just doesn't explain. So let's explain those. So that way somebody going through to the end isn't going to be totally miffed when they beat the big bad boss at the end, save the world, but get the bad ending and have no idea why.
I think if it's a easy enough way to do it, you can do that. I'd almost worry that it's like Demon Souls. Demon Souls, when it first came out, it had its world tendency, right? Whereas you die in it, the tendency gets darker and darker. If you beat the boss, it gets lighter and lighter. But it's not explained at all throughout, so the game's just really hard if you play online for no reason, because no one really gets it. And I would just worry that unless it's really explained, that it would just kind of fall under the same scenario.
But I think what I'm referring to is more of a, like say, for example, you want this really cool weapon that'll give you like a fire attack on top of your normal damage. You might have to take a particular character to this particular encampment on this one battlefield to have that interaction occur. And without a guide sitting next to you, how do you know?
Yeah, it's never going to happen.
So it's like my same thing with like playing a Fire Emblem game where it's like I want to play it with a guide.
Yeah.
But if we could redo it so that way somebody in the briefing room beforehand was like, by the way, I heard there's this really cool weapon over here you might want to check out. Like those are the kinds of things I think they could streamline, as well as just making the game overall, like you can press R, I believe, once you deploy your units and they'll start walking towards their destinations. Let's make an even faster, like speed up version. And maybe like, as I was saying about those character models, they're like so zoomed out. Maybe when I'm picking my character models, I can like actually zoom in, observe the models themselves. Maybe when I zoom in on it, it has a clear guide as to here's its elemental weaknesses and strengths. Here is the maps I could go to find it in the wild. Here's the type of terrain that you can encounter it in. Cause like, if you want to build up your army, you have to like go out into mountains to find dragons. You have to go to like swamps to find ogres and trolls and stuff. So it's like, again, just make it clear to the player. Other than that, keep the game fully intact.
Okay. Well, speaking of Fire Emblem, my next game is going to be a combo pack. It's the only combo pack that I think I have in on it.
Yeah, but totally. Me too.
It's the combination Path of Radiance, Radiant Dawn, i.e. the Ike story of Fire Emblem. It's going to be like Fire Emblem 9 and 10, I believe. So tactical RPGs, it's Intelligent Systems and Nintendo. Intelligent Systems are like the company doing your tactical RPGs. They did Advance Wars, they did Fire Emblem, they did Battalion Wars, etc., etc. But, oh, goodness, like 12, 13 years ago, I think at this point, Nintendo started remaking all the old Fire Emblem games. Mm-hmm. So they had Shadow Dragon, which came out on the DS, and then you had Fire Emblem Echoes, Shadows over Valencia for 3DS, and then they just kind of stopped. And I was looking into it, and it's not like the games did poorly or anything. I think it was just kind of not as much of a market as they were kind of hoping.
Well, as me being a casual Fire Emblem player, I own those, but like say Shadows over Valencia is one of 4 Fire Emblem games I own on 3DS. Mm-hmm. So I don't know why it's the one I would pick to play first.
Yeah. You know? It's like timeline-wise, it's the earliest, mm-hmm. but it's really streamlined. It's a little bit easy, and then it's just kind of bad difficult.
But then Awakening is also just so good.
Well, that's the thing. I think they were just kind of really trying to capture Awakening again. Mm-hmm. But they did 2 games of it, and then they just stopped. I kind of would have liked at least the first 6, because then that takes you into Western releases with Blazing Sword. But now I think that Fire Emblem is a stable Nintendo IP, because especially before Awakening, it really wasn't. Awakening was the, hey, you gotta sell well or else that's it. You're going the way of Captain Falcon.
Well, I remember literally like Fire Emblem Engage being announced and people in the comments under the video being like, is this what you all wanted now? Like this many Fire Emblem games in this short of a span?
And it really wasn't all that short of a span. It was like 3-year difference between the two.
It's just like when we're waiting 5, 6, 7 years for Zelda, and then suddenly Fire Emblem is like bam, bam, bam. But either way.
I think it's just residual on the fact that there are too many Fire Emblem characters in Smash Bros.
So why should I, as a casual Fire Emblem fan, play this dual pack that you're proposing?
I think it's going to be the story that'll connect the most with it. I think Ike at this point is the most recognizable Fire Emblem character, because he's kind of a focal point of the Smash Bros. Games, mm-hmm. right? Him/Roy, but the fact that Ike has 2 games and a longer story, the story in of itself on both games is good. The characters are cool, they're compelling, there's a lot of them, and you could use the remake to expand on some of the support conversations between the characters, because for Fire Emblem, that's a big thing with them. And notoriously, Radiant Dawn, the Wii version of the game, they really cut out the support conversations. It went from building the relationships between people and like background lore to just keep it up. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Which definitely just kind of takes out some of that world building that I feel like playing through Path of Radiance was built up. It's like why can't we just copy and paste that feature over?
Yeah, and it was like the one game that they didn't do it.
Weird.
But even since then, some of the support conversations have been a little bit lacking, in my opinion. But then you give some kind of boosts for bringing certain characters to the final chapter in Path of Radiance and then bringing them over into Radiant Dawn, having some kind of bonus for doing all of that. People don't like Radiant Dawn. I remember I went on to like the Fire Emblem forums for like 2 days, years and years and years ago. And it was like a little introduction. It's like, hey, what's your favorite Fire Emblem? And I mentioned that it was Radiant Dawn, and I just got clowned for it.
Very nice.
Because like people really don't like the support conversations in that game. But I liked that it was like a long game. You eventually get to a point where you have to split parties up. So you had to have been training everyone. And it really filled the idea of like a big epic tactical story.
That's good.
And I think that combination is the best that they've done for it. It might not be the best games in terms of combat or in terms of story, but I think for a casual audience, it might be the best one for that.
Okay. Fair enough. I mean, I don't even own Radiant Dawn yet. When I see it, it's like, it's more on the more expensive side for Wii games.
Yes.
So I always think to myself, like, what's my reason that I'm going to purchase this today, but I would definitely rather just have a remade one that's like perfectly streamlined and easier to access.
Yeah.
For some, like, doesn't cost $150 to play.
That's the main thing I see with these remakes, right? Is like make it more accessible, and people are going to look back more fondly on these things.
Yeah. Like, mine penultimate one that I wanted to talk about is a series that I don't even know if it's been released on anything since it originally came out, and that is Top Gear on the Super Nintendo. So I'm cheating on this one, and I'm going to include all 3 games. Why? Because I think if they were to just do one and just remaster like 32 tracks and be like, here you go, a full price game, that would be a little scummy. So I want them to do all 3. If you don't know what these are, well, you probably don't live in South America, because they are like the Mario and Zelda of like South America, is like Streets of Rage or whatever that fighting game is, and Top Gear supposedly. So it kind of builds on Pole Position or like Rad Racer, if you ever played either of those.
Okay. Yep.
So it's that style of like camera behind you, like you're constantly chasing like the horizon that's coming towards you, but these ones are more just like shaped tracks and less of a get to the end point, if that makes sense. So all 3 of these games, your focus is on, we're going fast. We have a lot of tight steering and turns, and there's a field of like 20 opponents also racing with you. So when you start reaching the point that you're lapping them, then like F-Zero, it's like the opponents become one of the main obstacles on the road. Mm-hmm. And something that I don't particularly enjoy about the original Super Nintendo version is that it's a forced horizontal split screen. So you only get the top half of the screen to work with. And what they did to counter that is you always have a rival on the bottom screen if you're not playing multiplayer.
Okay.
So you always have a rival. So you can kind of see how close like second place is behind you, or how far like somebody ahead of you is, depending on like how you're doing in the race. And it just kind of helps it feel like you're part of like it helps bring some character to the rest of the racers out on the field there. So the second one, what they added was just a few more hazard types. A few more tracks have like more up and down elevation than it did before. And then the third one, Top Gear 3000, is set in the future, so set in the year 3000. So it kind of looks and feels the same, but the cars are futuristic and have some new abilities, like they can make some cool jumps, and instead of having to stop and like fuel up in like a pit stop to keep your car going, it's like F-Zero style. Drive over this color and your fuel will go up, drive over this color, and your car will like fix its damage.
Okay.
But anyway, that's just a basic overview of them all. If I was to bring all 3 back and revamp them, I would say let's kind of redo this story mode. So instead of doing it all as like sets of 4 races like Cups and Mario Kart, another game that I've mentioned quite a few times recently is Horizon Chase Turbo, which is made by some of the same people that did the original Top Gear. So let's model it after Horizon Chase, where it's just you pick each course individually, and then once you beat the like main set of 3 courses, the final challenge one unlocks. So you can do them in any order and just kind of progress world by world, and maybe borrow another page from that, in that there's just collectibles strewn about every track. So instead of just racing to win, you can also race to 100% complete.
Okay.
So that just gives it a little more of a, like, let's kind of grind out each race one at a time, instead of here's one 5-hour gauntlet of races. Did you have fun? So that's my idea. I think you could either do the graphic style of Horizon Chase, or maybe like an HD 2D style would also look pretty nice. Mm-hmm. But beyond that, music is already just absolutely golden. You barely even need to touch that. But yeah, maybe some options to turn off like the fuel meter mechanic for like beginners, or uh, obviously not having to do split screen, so you can have the full screen to yourself. There's just some small tweaks and improvements like that.
I really like as a potential option too. I played the old Wonder Boy games, and with them, they had like you hit the L button and it reverts from the brand new good like 2025 graphics to like a Super Nintendo style one. I think that would be a really neat idea as well. Give it the sense of like, well, I can go and I can play it with these new gorgeous graphics, or I can really lean into the nostalgia and just keep it how it was, right?
Exactly.
But my final one, it's always probably going to be near one of the top, because I don't know if it'll come back, because the company that made it no longer exists and they've kind of gone on to do other things. But that is Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. It's a 2004 action RPG developed by a company called Troika Games and published by Activision. Now, Troika Games were a group of people that did the original Fallout games, and then tried and failed to get the new version of Fallout, which wound up being Fallout 3 that Bethesda got. So they made this game instead.
It's like they were actively developing Fallout 3 and then...
So they developed the first Fallout game, and then they bid to get it and they lost it because Bethesda outbid them. But it's set in the World of Darkness, which is a tabletop RPG setting. So kind of like a Forgotten Realms and D&D. But it's just is that vampires and demons and werewolves all exist in this kind of gothic punk real world, but they live in secrecy. So your vampires, you have edicts that you're supposed to follow, right? So you can't show yourselves to humans. You can't like kill them, things like that. You have to maintain your secrecy. And the Wikipedia page on it calls it a flawed masterpiece. And I would agree. I think the story and the setting is top notch. The quest, the world is really cool to go through. It does a really good way of feeling like the world is big, even though in 2004 you couldn't really do these big overarching open world types of things that your Oblivions or Fallout 3s did.
Not to interrupt, but I'm imagining, because I'm seeing like the Bloodborne background on your computer here, and I'm imagining like that world filled with like demons and vampires, but then you're trying to play as one of them, just like staying secret.
Yeah, think more like the second game is set in Seattle. So think more like a Seattle type of thing, but it's very almost like Wolf Among Us.
Yeah,
kind of like noir.
Not as like overtop fantasy, medieval style.
Yeah. Yeah, more like your 80s neon, dark, gritty kind of thing.
That's cool.
Yeah. So the story's great, the setting's great, the quest, the world's really cool. The combat kind of sucks, in my opinion, and I think most other people's as well. I was reading notes that basically said the melee is the best part of it, which is crazy considering you're a vampire and you could use a gun and like spells and things like that. And it was apparently a really buggy game. So it came out, if you want to go into a little bit of like a gaming history perspective, Activision had a deal with Valve at the time that they would not release Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines before Half-Life 2 came out. So then they just released on the same day, which is really, really funny. But I think it fits that perfect sense of style of a game that should be remade. Because I think on release, it only did like 75,000.
Only.
Which, like, for the time, for the budget, for what it was going up against, was really not that great. But it's one of the games that really spiked in popularity when it got put on Steam.
I was going to say, was this a PC exclusive?
This was PC exclusive.
Okay.
From what I believe.
And when's the sequel supposed to be out?
So the sequel's supposed to come out this year. Now, I did some digging on the sequel of it, and I watched like the trailer. It was in the Xbox showcase. Let me tell you, it doesn't look good.
Ooh, why is that?
So they remade it. The graphics look really cool. it's always worrisome when they change developers partway through. So they changed from, I can't remember what they changed from, but it had the original Vampire Bloodlines writers. Two of their main writers were part of that development studio. So like, okay, we'll set it in Seattle, we'll have it be the same style of game, all that kind of thing. And partway through development, it stopped because now Vampire Masquerade is owned by Paradox because they bought out like the company that did the tabletop setting. And the new developers are the people that did Dear Esther. And like everybody went to the Rapture, like all the walking sim kind of things. And watching the trailer, it just didn't hit the same feel of what you liked out of Vampire Masquerade. Okay. Because it's more like a Knights of the Old Republic, maybe not Knights of the Old Republic, more like a Oblivion type of style for combat. Whereas they turned it into Dishonored, would kind of be like the change. And like you're a vampire person, like it doesn't really fill that same kind of fantasy.
All right. So if you were to go back to the original, what would you do to it? I
don't want to say blue pointed again, but I would fix most of the bugs that had the issue with it, expand the world a little bit, do a couple more quests, bring back the original writers and some of the original devs. Because Troika, looking into them, they went on to do a lot of things with Obsidian Entertainment. So the people that did Pillars of Eternity, two of the three main guys wound up doing Outer Worlds, not to be confused with Outer Wilds.
Oh, every time.
One of the guys did Diablo 3. A lot of stuff with that. It worked at Blizzard for like 12 years. So I was like, they're good people on it. Just get them back on it and make it bigger, fix up some of the graphic issues, maybe clean up the combat a little bit. Because there shouldn't be a game where like, oh, you should really just play this one type because it's the best. But the world is just so cool and I would like to see more with it. But then seeing the sequel and have it not be what I think myself and a lot of fans of the game want it to be is just going to kill it.
Well, I hope that it was just a bad look at how the game is going to be and hopefully we'll retain some of that original style, but who knows? The last one I wanted to talk about is near and dear to my heart because that is my favorite game of all time. And it is one that has never been like fully redone since like Xbox 360, and that is Banjo-Kazooie. So I consider this game to be pretty near perfect. Just like music, visuals, overall style and flow of the gameplay are just, it's still fun to pick up and play today. And it feels very optimized for Nintendo 64. So when I played like nuts and bolts, I'm like, this just doesn't look like Banjo-Kazooie. It doesn't play like Banjo-Kazooie. But I think if we're going to go in and we're going to like bring this game back and not even change much about it, just update the visuals. That's it. That's all I'm asking. I think we should also throw in Banjo-Tooie and the Game Boy Advance game Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Revenge.
Oh, it's like a combo.
Yes, like a combo pack. Oops, I cheated again.
Yeah, how many games are in your top 5?
I talked about what, like 10 today? It's fine.
I think so.
So the second one, Banjo-Tooie, it improved on a lot of animations and like kind of smoothed out the visuals. But because it's on Nintendo 64, these like really smooth visuals run. They run so bad. So I don't even think they need to do a lot to improve the visuals. Like they just need to make it not look as blurry and muddy in the background, pretty much. Just sharpen it up a little, but then let's make them all 60 frames a second. And then as a bonus, you don't even have to remaster it. Throw in Grunty's Revenge because that game is impossible to find and play unless you're going to like download it online.
Yeah, sail the seas.
Yeah. So I think if they threw that one in as a bonus, that would be great. But if they could make that into like a like HD 2D style, maybe I'm reaching on that one. I don't think it has that big of a market for Grunty's Revenge specifically. But and I don't think it's one that they should like redo from the ground up in like a 3D style. I don't think the people that made Banjo-Kazooie good are still going to be on that project. So I think it is one, let's just bump up the visuals on 1 and 2, throw in Grunty's Revenge as a bonus, and pump that out there so that everyone can understand why Banjo-Kazooie is my favorite game. We can make Banjo-Tooie an actual playable game, and I just really want to play Grunty's Revenge. That's the main gist we got here. Is I want to play these 3 games again. I want it like a Mario 3D All-Stars pack style scenario where it's just give me these 3 games.
And the other 3 games. And the other
and 3 more games, and then you just all of Rare's games released. Oh wait, they already did that,
and it did okay.
It did okay. Yeah. It was okay.
Yeah, see, Banjo-Kazooie is one of those ones that you really don't have a lot that you can update and upgrade with it.
That's what I'm saying. Is like
it's like smoothness and graphics, and then you're pretty well set.
Literally. All right. Well, I think that is all we had for you guys today. So it was a bit of a longer one. And sorry, my list was longer than just 5 things I wanted to talk about.
I did 6. It's no better. But thanks for listening. Let us know any most wanted remakes that you folks might have. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening.